I'm Connor Old, and welcome to another episode of Masters of Controlled Chaos. And today we're going to be looking at a director who has contributed a lot to the world of cinema, more than even some of the other directors I've covered before. But I'm so glad I got to get around to him. He is the director of Apocalypse Now, of The Conversation, and of the Godfather trilogy. He is none other than Francis Ford Coppola. So, welcome back, guys. If you're new to the series, what we do every single week is we break down a new filmmaker. We talk about the general idea of what makes them great. I also look at what I consider their best movie, my favorite movie of theirs, and then underrated movie of theirs. And today, like I said, we'll be looking at Francis Ford Coppola, and I'm really excited to do this episode because his movies, especially sort of four masterpiece run from 72 to 79, is incredibly influential to me. I know it's influential to a lot of people. I consider some of them arguably some of the greatest movies of all time. This was probably the hardest sort of genre episode maybe to pick the best and the favorites because they're all so good. You know, you can look at any top 10 list and The Godfather's probably on the top 10. A lot of them they're one or they're two. Even something like The Godfather Part 2 or Apocalypse Now. I mean, I want to talk about something like The Conversation, which is just an incredible movie that sort of maybe gets buried underneath some of his other movies at that time. But he's just an incredible filmmaker, and let's just start talking about him. Obviously, I just mentioned the 72 to 79 run, that being 72, The Godfather, 74, both The Conversation and Godfather Part 2, and then 79 with Apocalypse Now. Those are four masterpieces, without a doubt in my mind. Four incredible movies that stand the test of time, that are very different from each other, even the two Godfathers, because of just the way he was in that mind space at the time. And you wonder, like, how can you make like these four classics, these four masterpieces in this certain amount of time? And then some people wonder, like, oh, what happened to him? We know Spielberg today, we know Scorsese today. What happened to Coppola? People still know him as a household name, I think, but he definitely hasn't had the success that his counterparts had. But that being said, I don't think his career after Apocalypse Now should be diminished. I think the reason maybe for that is because he's really involved with independent cinema. He always was. The sort of big budget things like Apocalypse Now, you can look into that, but the production was a disastrous sort of experience for him and sort of crushed him, and some would say just like destroyed him. But I think just wanted him to go back to independent cinema and create movies that really were personal to him and maybe even experimental, something like a Steven Soderbergh, and you see that afterwards, something like Peggy Sue Got Married, or his movie Afterwards, which I'm the One Time After or something like that. I'm forgetting the name, unfortunately, which is like a musical. So he does musical, he even does something like horror with Bram Stoker's Dracula, comedy. He's done other dramas like The Outsiders, Rumblefish. Those are like teen type movies. So he's definitely gone to different genres that people don't necessarily want to talk about. They really want to talk about this four movies here, and that's what we're going to mainly talk about because they're so prolific and they're so amazing. I love those movies. They're some of my favorite movies of all time. But having those movies and then you have something like his other movies later down the line, it's sort of wondering, like, okay, what happened to him? But I still think it's worth, especially when I went down to this director profile and really got deep into his work, I sort of, was appreciative of his career afterwards. His career definitely went down, but you can only go down from Apocalypse Now, from The Godfather. You can't recreate these classics. It's impossible. But definitely Coppola in the 70s in that time was the best filmmaker in that time, and that's beating out Scorsese and Spielberg and George Lucas even at the time. I mean, his that's why I said at the top of the show, his contributions to cinema are incredible, just because, even if he just made The Godfather, it would have been fine, but then he makes The Godfather Part 2 arguably better, and then Apocalypse Now, a totally wildly different movie, and then a really intimate character piece like The Conversation, where it takes sort of the independent movies, a real personal movie that he wanted to make. It was almost like okay, I'll give you Godfather Part 2, but give me The Conversation. And both of them turned out fantastic. So really interesting to see how he does that. And then, let's talk about a little bit about the technical aspect of Coppola now. Some of the stuff he likes to use, I know, so a lot of wide lenses. He doesn't use a lot of close-ups. A lot of it are either wide or medium, so from the waist up, or just like why where you see the bodies. That's why I think I actually appreciate a lot of his costume design, even in something like Peggy Sue Got Married or Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is phenomenal. And of course the Godfather trilogy. He just does a great job at really using clothes actually to understand the character and what they mean, and especially in terms of class and social hierarchy. I mean, even talk about the outsiders, the greasers, right? How they dress is so like sort of iconic and slick and sort of cool, and then you have sort of the Godfather trilogy, and then the immaculate suits that they wear, and then compared to someone like, you know, maybe someone down the class that has to pay their money to the mafia. Just interesting things like that. You know, obviously he's obsessed with families. I actually have a great quote from Alicia Malone, which I'll say in a minute, just talking about families and the social hierarchy of that. But he didn't really stick with that. You know, he's gone back to that time and time again, but then he goes into more just people and personal transformations, whether it be Apocalypse Now or Peggy Sue Got Married or Bram Stoker's Dracula. Really these sort of physical or mental transformations, even something like The Conversation, and really delve deep into a single protagonist. So he can do the family ensemble thing, but they can also do the individual things like The Conversation and really encapsulate sort of an individual's mindset. So that's really interesting. Another thing I want to point out is he actually, a lot of times, like many great filmmakers, decides to use reactions, wordless scenes, instead of using dialogue to sort of explain to the audience. He definitely does not baby feed the audience, but he makes it better for that. You know, of course, the incredible scene from The Godfather with Al Pacino, Michael Corleone, where he has to kill the guy and he has to take the gun from the bathroom. And he takes it, and then he goes back to the table and just sits there, and then you hear the train sounds. It's almost like he's going through his mind, like the tension builds up, and then he shoots him, bang, bang, you know. And he could have said something like, had like a nervous breakdown in the bathroom or whatever, but he just sort of went and did it. And especially that character of Michael Corleone is just very much a not a talkative guy. He's not necessarily a shy guy, but he's always thinking. He's always trying to mastermind something. Even something like Marlon Brando, it's like when he speaks for a reason, and I think that's a really interesting thing. And same thing with even Apocalypse Now or The Conversation, where The Conversation is like all about listening and audio and using that almost as a way of like where the audience can place ourselves into the character. I think Captain Willard from Apocalypse Now does an incredible job at that, where Martin Sheen is just like a blank face, where we can almost, like a Keanu Reeves, where we can project ourselves onto the character and almost like believe like we're another character in someone else's story. I feel like he does that a lot and really well, because he decides not to use dialogue but necessarily have sort of more choir scenes and explain it through listening the way the audience views it. They're not talking, right? They're just listening, they're trying to absorb the story. And then he does that with a lot of his main characters. A lot of main characters, especially in The Conversation, which is all about listening. But listening and trying to figure out sort of how the story moves along, and that sort of theme of watching and listening instead of talking is really prevalent, and he uses it to a great effect in a lot of his movies. Okay, so now, before we transition to best and favorite, I'm just going to give a quote from Alicia Malone. This is an episode of Profiles, a big inspiration on this show. Just watched the episode on Francis Ford Coppola, and I picked this one out. She says, "I find these movies are often about families. There's the obvious family, the Godfather family, but there's also the family that you're not born into. One that happens by circumstance, like in War and Apocalypse Now, or a family bred from social classes, like in The Outsiders." So, you know, that's a family is definitely an interesting thing there, but the way she was able to word that and put the outsiders in this category and Apocalypse Now in that category, really well done, and I think that's an excellent observation. And I'll leave that on that note right before we get into what I consider his best movie, The Godfather. And they're both incredible, they're both different movies, but I went with what I consider arguably one of the greatest movies of all time, The Godfather. And I went with this instead of Godfather Part 2 because Part 2 is an incredible film. Some say it's arguably better because he had a bigger budget and he could do more things, but the way that movie sort of jumps around and is in like Cuba and does that stuff and is not necessarily centered the way I feel The Godfather movie is, that's the number one reason why I feel like you have it's in New York and they have it set in there, and then they have the other mafia families, and then, you know, they have that connection to Italy, but that's sort of it. They don't really go anywhere else. They're not trying to expand the empire. They have a sort of a stable structure. I love how the feeling of the movie is like, this has existed for a long time. I'm a big video game player, and then I love one video game, something like The Witcher 3 does a great job where you walk into a world and you're like, this is a world that's been lived in, things have happened in this world. This is an old world. I feel the same way with The Godfather, where it's like, we're not seeing something from the rise. We're seeing something that's established, that has a set rules and regulation that works in conjunction like a machine. And really interesting just to see that and sort of opening the world. And that's what I love about The Godfather, just opening the world to that sort of crime underbelly. But why I also chose this one instead of Godfather Part 2 for the best, it's also because of Marlon Brando's performance. Of course, he did an incredible job with this, the cotton balls in the mouth and just the slow way of speaking. It's imitated now, right? But, that was totally unique and totally interesting choice at the time and should be praised for that, even though it can be considered, looking back, like almost like a bit of a caricature. But he's so intimidating. He totally works as Vito Corleone, and he always loves, especially in Coppola's movies, his philosophies and beliefs, and not from a religious standpoint, but from like a moral standpoint of what you think needs to be done. And, that's why Vito says, "Oh, drugs is dirty business." Like he has a set rule, guidelines, and rules, and that's why you can sympathize to him. That's why I really love The Godfather, and why I think The Godfather really works is because everyone has a family, right? So, or most people at least, and everyone has that relatability factor to it, and sort of the innocence that family comes with, because everyone can relate to that experience. So you take that, which is a very relatable experience, and then you add that to the underground crime ring, that sort of the underbelly that a lot of people at the time, and even still, you don't know a lot about the underground crime area. You know about people will sell drugs or whatever, and people get killed or whatever. But especially in the mafia in the 40s. Which is where it takes place at the time, and just that interesting fact of like you have the juxtaposition of the family part, which is so innocent, is very relatable, to something the crime underbelly, which is totally not relatable for most people. They're not into it, so they're intrigued, and it draws you into by the incredible performances and how everything works together in conjunction. It really draws you in, and then sort of shows you this world, and you're so amazed by it, almost like a fantasy movie. Where like, what is this? How does it work? And that's how some of the best parts of the movie go. And just them talking about how are we going to do this, and the incredible looming threat of being killed at any time. Slight spoilers, when Vito Corleone gets shot, and it's like in the movie you're like, wow, like this guy, he feels like this really important sort of leader figure just got shot, brings it down. Within the hour of the movie that he gets shot in, it feels like, okay, yeah, this guy he's obviously dying and he's going to reach his end, but it still feels like a great sort of power, a great column has fallen in this mafia sort of family. I love that part, and really just, it's an American epic in the sense of where it has so much ambition, and we're actually looks at themes of ambition and loyalty and family and respect, and what does it mean to the family that you're born with? Should you have this immense amount of loyalty to them, or should you not? And just so there's trust and respect, and something we even see modern day today, something like with Donald Trump and his family, right? His family is directly to do with a lot of his political decisions, and he brought them up because their family, they're loyal, they'll trust and respect them. Sort of that Godfather thing where you can maybe trust your friends, but your friends could backstab you. They're not blood, right? So you have that connection there. But then you're born with these people. You didn't choose these people. Do you have to respect these people? I love the incredible themes that this movie portrays, and I can go on hours and hours just to talk about the things the themes that are in the movie. Of course, I want to talk about, I know a lot of people talk about Godfather Part 2. The amazing part about that is how you have Michael's fall and then the prelude. So it's a sequel and it's a prequel, and you can see Vito's rise and the different juxtaposition and characteristics of why one rises and why one falls. That's really interesting. But a lot of people forget about Michael's arc in this movie, where we see him as a Boy Scout soldier who's just at the wedding and says, yeah, that's my family. I don't really worry about them. They do their own thing. I'm not going to get into that, But then he sort of gets drawn into it, and more, and he's asked by his family, and he feels a sense of debt or loyalty to his family because they've done so much to him, and see it right until the end shot where, he tells Kay, oh, no, everything's fine or whatever, and then, nothing's going to happen or whatever, and then she walks out, and then he sees the two people come in, and then they kiss his ring or whatever, and then the reaction shot, like I said with Coppola, and his reaction shot, the face that she shows, and then the closing of the door, it's like, man, that's one of the greatest movie endings of all time, and just showing that the complete arc of Michael as a character who goes from this innocent guy now into like this evil sort of corrupt man, and then just the best performances from I think everybody in the movie, like James Caan's probably best performance, Robert Duvall, okay, maybe not Duvall because Apocalypse Now, but Al Pacino is an incredible performance. Marlon Brando. It's like you're looking at these legends, and he created a lot of these legends. Like Al Pacino, he found him. Robert De Niro, he sort of didn't find him, but he won him his first Oscar and put him in that movie. A lot of people didn't want Al Pacino in the movie for the first Godfather, and then a lot of people didn't want De Niro in for the second Godfather. And just creating those great actors, and James Caan and Robert Duvall, like I said, and just really creating this legacy of these actors and giving them some of their best performances. And I think that's why I think The Godfather is the best, is because it's such a perfect movie in the sense of Francis Ford Coppola makes all the right decisions. The score by Nino Rota is so iconic and operatic, almost like it just really works within the movie. Of course, the cinematography, the use of shadows and the darkness is incredible. Of course, I talked about the costume design before. And I just think the grand sort of epic scale of this, in the sense of it feels like a Shakespeare play. It feels very operatic, just like this big, grandiose scale, and it works so well. He nails it on the head, and it's so hard to do. Some of the greatest movies of all time have that epic scale, Lord of the Rings, but this is an epic scale in terms of you have the American life, and you have a little bit of that, but it's like the sustained foundation, a world that we've been into, and you really understand how things go, and you sort of float through the movie, and you go through, and then it's over, and you're just like, wow, like that was an experience. And especially when I watch them, I watch 1 and 2 back to back. I don't watch 3, and I just see like, wow, this is an incredible arc, and just like the way we see these characters grow over the 6-hour journey. Something like The Lord of the Rings. That's I think a great example of just the incredible arcs that they're able to do. Okay, now I'll finish up the episode with going over to what my favorite is, which is Apocalypse Now. All right, so we talked about Apocalypse Now. I have it here on DVD, which is an incredible DVD, bought for only $8, which is an incredible deal, where you have Apocalypse Now, the theatrical cut. The cut I think is best, and I recommend you watch. But there's also the Apocalypse Now Redux with 20 minutes of new footage, which is also interesting, but I actually think the theatrical cut is a little better and moves a little bit better. And then the incredible documentary Hearts of Darkness, which if you don't know about Apocalypse Now, watch Apocalypse Now and then watch the documentary Hearts of Darkness. And just an incredible movie which just talks about the experience of filming Apocalypse Now. Really incredible, where it's just a disaster. Like Martin Sheen had a heart attack, and the Marlon Brando showed up overweight. He was supposed to be like this super buff military guy, and he showed up overweight, and like they didn't shoot for like 3 days. He was just Francis Ford Coppola explaining the part to Marlon Brando. He had like an earpiece in and like telling him, feeding him the lines, and it was like, wow, this is like, and you wonder like, and there was a typhoon that like destroyed the set, and then the Filipino army, they were using their helicopters, and sometimes they're fighting a civil war at the time, so the helicopters would be flying. Oh, we have to go back and fight the war. So then they go and turn around. So it was like this incredible sort of like headache of a movie, and but really just an interesting documentary, and it's so amazing how this movie got made, and why I chose this as my favorite, which is so hard, over The Godfather, which I love, and The Conversation, which is maybe even more up my alley, and the more times I watch it, the more times I fall in love with it, and even The Godfather Part 2. I just really love the Apocalypse Now in terms of it's different than some of his other movies, and it's totally unique in its own sense. It reminds me a lot of one of my favorite movies of all time, Taxi Driver, in the dreamlike visions of it, of how it just goes through the jungle and creates this jungle as this mystic quality, very different from the American life that we, and sort of the Western life that a lot of us viewers know, and really creating that sort of otherworldly, almost like fantasy type movie. I think this is the best war movie of all time. Covers every side of the war, the political side that we see in like Paths of Glory, to make a mission. Paths of Glory is a very political movie, but the political side, to make a mission to go kill this one soldier or whatever that could harm, like he's not going to do a lot to the war, but he could harm PR really issues. In my opinion, I think that's what the sort of main part is it. You have the action, the incredible action that's found in other movies like Platoon. Then you have just the general like morality of the movie, of just how like it affects people later on with PTSD that we've seen in countless movies, like something like An American Sniper, even though that's not really a good example, but it just covers, I think, all aspects of the war, and then especially all that being said, it's the best war movie, but the book that's based on, Hearts of Darkness, is not even set in the Vietnam War, but yet it feels very much like the Vietnam War itself, of just like I talked about, the mystic quality, the not knowing necessarily who you're fighting, who the enemies are, the incredible scene where Lawrence Fishburne's character shoots the girl who's just running to her puppy, and then they're like, oh my god, like they're freaking out, and then it's like, oh, what to do in the confusion? You just have to shoot the whole family. It's like this innocent family or whatever, but you don't know like who's the enemy and who's not, because it's so like dangerous. It's not sort of strict rules, guidelines. And I think Vietnam is probably one of the most interesting wars in that sense. Of course, the movie is backed on the incredible arc of Captain Willard. I love the arc of him just being a soldier, doing set to a mission, and then his sort of subtle breakdown as he goes through on this boat and reading more about Colonel Kurtz, less about how like his mission was to kill him, but he necessarily doesn't want to kill him anymore. He just wants to meet the guy. He's so obsessed and interested in that character. So that's why I love this movie, because it takes elements from the conversation, the obsession, and that privacy sort of notion there, and then it takes that and the and then of course the grand ensemble that we've seen on the Godfather trilogy, and then just creates this interesting morality picture of like his interesting, the way that Colonel Kurtz is portrayed without even seeing him on screen. The hype almost is sort of built up to him, because he's such an interesting guy. Like, what happened to him? He went into the forest, and then he was this amazing soldier, and then went to the jungle, and then what happened to him? You know, like, we don't know what happened to him. He sort of just broke down and went AWOL, and just, I love that interesting character, and I think when we meet him, Marlon Brando is an incredible job of acting, and just the way that Coppola decides to use the artistic decision of using shadows to make him even more of a serious character, and then the way we hear his booming voice before we even see him, just like this really mystic figure. And then even you're in this like regular war, you see other soldiers, they're fighting, it's like, we get it. And then you go further along, and then in the Redux we see a French plantation, and it's like, what? This feels like such a dream and almost like a fantasy quality. And then you go along, and it's like, now you're in a jungle, and there's people like almost like an ancient civilization, and there's Colonel Kurtz, and they're worshiping him. And then you have an American photographer who's totally gone batshit insane, and Dennis Hopper played brilliantly. And that brings me to my next point, which is the supporting cast of something like Kilgore with Robert Duvall. You know, I love the smell of napalm in the morning, the incredible just surfing loving guy who is just great as this sort of funny relief character. But then also, I mean, the characters support the sense of what people are like in war, and really how war affects them, and how people respond in a life or death situation, and how some people really love it and sort of gain that sense, and some other people are scared. You know, maybe like Lawrence Fishburne, who I only think was like 15 at the time of filmmaking, and the different just people of that. And you know, Colonel Kurtz has an incredible, like I talked about, philosophy, and the way his ideals are viewed, and the way he views on the world. And when we see Colonel Kurtz, Captain Willard, go in, and then we see Dennis Hopper's character, or even Colonel Kurtz, you're like, wow, he's going to become like this. You know, the jungle sort of will warp his mind. Most recently, Lost City of Z does a great job of this, of just the obsession with the jungle, and sort of the interestingness of the unknown, and that sort of desire that I think a lot of people have, just a curious nature. And Coppola does a great job just depicting this. And then, I mean, some incredible edits of just, I love when Martin Sheen's sitting and looking up in the bed, and you see the ceiling fan go, and then that's intercut with the chopper. Of course, the great shot in the beginning with the chopper just coming like that to the right of the Valkyrie scene. I mean, just incredible scenes over and over and over and over again. You know, I love the movie something like The Deer Hunter, but The Deer Hunter has a lot of slow parts. Those slow parts eventually help them, and you know, that will add the benefit of the movie later on in something like the Russian roulette scenes, right? There's definitely the low points, and then the climax, and the climax makes that better. But it has a lot of slow parts. But Apocalypse Now is a different movie where it has such great scenes over and over again. It has that climax, and even something like the Playboy scene. I mean, it's just like an incredible epic scale of a movie. You're like, wow, like you're almost like, what's happening? How is this happening? But you're also like, wow, I'm so intrigued by the movie. And I just really think that even though this is a war movie, this is definitely not like I say, this is the best war movie because war is not just about fighting and action. It's about human nature and the nature of conflict, which is in our human behavior, has always been around the idea of conflict, and just the idea of how you can judge that in moral consciousness. And you know, some people can kill people with an ease, some people can't, and just really, it's not really a war movie, but more of a study of human nature, if anything. And I think Coppola does a great job of that, and using that in the Vietnam War, and of course Hearts of Darkness. It's just an incredible movie. I love this movie so much, and we're running out of time so quickly, I'm just going to go with underrated as The Outsiders, just because this is a great adaptation of the book. I think the adaptations are really hard to do, and Coppola nails this. And then, of course, the incredible amount of actors. I mean, Tom Cruise, Matt Dillon, Kevin Bacon, just like, there's Ralph Macchio, these, like, I think Tom Cruise was like 7th bill on this one. It's like, that's never going to happen again. Like, he is totally like, just this, he has an ability for casting that we talked about with Al Pacino and Robert De Niro. Like, he started the careers of Al Pacino, of Robert De Niro, of Tom Cruise, like putting them into sort of the mainstream, which is like, it's incredible. Like, those were some of the greatest actors of all time, in my opinion. And just the amount of heart that this movie has, it really earns it. Some movies don't earn it these days, but this movie earns it 5 times over. Anyways, guys, for all those reasons, that's why Francis Ford Coppola is a master of controlled chaos. Make sure you like the video, comment below, let me know. Are you a fan of Francis Ford Coppola? Have you even seen The Godfather? If not, like, definitely go check it out. It's an amazing movie. But anyways, guys, my name is Connor Old, and until next time, stay tuned.